Investment Tuesday, and so we're glad you could join. And this is about common sense investing. And today we're going to talk about net operating income. Oh, and by the way, if you wanted to join the show, you can join the show. And I think I put the correct link in the Facebook page, but if you're watching, we're glad you're here. So today, let's talk about net operating income. You know, there's a lot of stories behind that, but net operating income is probably the most important figures that you can calculate when you're trying to determine the value of an investment. I mean, when you look at a stock or you're going to buy a bond, you know that they're going to pay you a certain percentage. And you don't have to worry about that too much because that stock's going to go up and down. You hope it always goes up and you'll make more money. Investment real estate's a little bit different because the income can fluctuate dramatically from month to month. And so we look at net operating income and we look at it on a yearly basis to determine whether we're going to make any money or not, or whether we're going to go broke, whether we paid too much, and you'll be able to tell very quickly. And a lot of folks I know kind of gloss over net operating income. Very simple formulas, very simple to figure. And before I forget, I'll give you those formulas later on in the broadcast. And for watching this show, if you would like to know more about investment real estate, I will send you a digital copy of this book, and it's a guide to 1031 exchanges. And if you're doing investment real estate, you really need to look at that book and read it. I'll send it to you in digital form. And if you want it in a hardback copy, Bill Exeter, that owns that accommodation company, will be glad to send you hard copies. So let's get right into it and let's talk about net operating income. Now, there's 5 parts to NOI. And we call that's just a shortened version, net operating income, and it has 5 parts. And it's odd that 3 of those parts must be accurate. I used to say that 3 of those parts must be true. And the fact is that you need to get it just as true as you possibly can. In other words, they must be as accurate as possible. Because just think of it this way, with net operating income, your loan is figured off of that. If you need a loan, your profit is figured off of net operating income, your cash flow is. And so you need to know what that figure is. And that figure is like the bottom line of your checkbook. If you don't have anything left, there is no more money in your account. And that's the way it is with net operating income. If you get down to the end of the year and you don't have anything left, you know, you're pretty well coming out of your pocket with any repairs or expenses on the property. And look at it this way, net operating income moves very quickly up and down, but a water heater will probably cost you anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 to have that installed. And so, you know, if your rents are very close, in other words, if you're only making a few $100s a month above your expenses, you're not in a very good position. Because just one water heater can take care of 3 or 4 months worth of income. It'll just wipe it out. And so if you got a 10-plex, let's say you have 10 water heaters, or you have a boiler that services all those units, and that thing goes out, you know, you might spend $15,000 to $18,000 on a boiler. And so a lot of this things that we look at with net operating income, we want to know in this investment how good that net operating income is. Is it sustainable? Are we going to be able to have any money left over after we make our payment to the lender and we pay all of our expenses? You know, taxes on some of these properties can run in the thousands of dollars per year. And so net operating income comes very, very critical. And so net operating income must be true. And let's talk about these 5 parts. The first one is gross income. You know, gross income is kind of like everything else. Everybody knows about gross income and anybody can figure it. It's a rule of thumb. It's out there. You can drive by an apartment complex or a building. You can say, yes, those units will probably rent for $600 a month. Oh, there's 10 of them. Well, that's $6,000 a month. Well, that sounds pretty good. So gross income takes all the units, if you're 100% full, at whatever you think that rental market is. And let me tell you, the rental market can change from block to block, city to city, and even 2 complexes that are next door to each other can have different rentals. So net operating income, again, becomes very important. So gross income is just an estimate of what you think. Take that, multiply it times your units, and you've got your gross income for the year. And we figure it on an annual basis. Now, the next figure is effective gross income. And that's after your vacancy factor. You know, I get a lot of properties that have no vacancy factor at all. And that's all right if you've got a 5-year lease or a 2-year lease. But it's not all right if you're on a month-to-month or you're on yearly leases and they're all considered short-term. But a lender, when you go to the lender to try to get a loan, they will figure in a 6 to a 10% vacancy factor. And that takes 6% of your income away right there. And so always figure in a vacancy factor, and it can be reasonable, but a vacancy factor does not have to be true. It can be whatever you think it's going to be, because effective gross income needs to be true. So if you have an effective gross, and where would you get that truth? Because we're only 2 steps in. You get that from the owner's tax records or their income and expense statement. And you hope that they're not fudging anything. So when you get those figures, you want to go over them. And you've got your vacancy factor taken out. You've got your effective gross, and your effective gross needs to be very accurate. And the next thing that we have are our expenses. Now, expenses are really critical. I've seen a lot of owners over the last 20 years pad the expenses. And what do I mean by that? I mean that a lot of owners, not a lot, but some owners will put in their car insurance or their house insurance or their cell phone bills for all of their kids and their family. And the reason is because they want those tax deductions. Well, what that does is that throws your NOI off. So your net operating income is therefore not true. And a bank is going to look at this expense statement, and they're going to look at it and try to figure out if the expenses that you have declared are really true and accurate. And what they want to know is, how is this property performing with these expenses? And so you can see that the expenses need to be very accurate. You know, you don't want to do a lot of estimating in there. If there's not a rental management fee because the owner manages it himself, then I would put in 6 or 10%, depending on the property and the condition. Rental management fee is usually left out if the owner is running the property themselves. They say, oh, well, I don't charge a management fee because I'm doing all the management. Well, that means you're working for free And most investors and most lenders will all require a management fee to be plugged in, and that's 6 to 10%. So we got a vacancy fee that needs to be 5 to 10%. We've got a management fee that's 6 to 10%. And those are really real figures. And then you've got your taxes, your insurance, and your maintenance. And you've got to put in maintenance. An owner says, well, I do all the maintenance myself. Well, an investor needs to know how that property is performing. There's just no way around it. If it's not performing well, that means you're going to have to spend money on it, and that means your rate of return is going to go down, which means that you will probably offer less for the property. I mean, you're not going to buy a stock at $2 when it's only worth $1. So you're not going to buy an apartment complex that has a lot of management issues or maintenance issues that you're going to have to spend money to correct. So that's why income and expenses is so very critical. And, you know, some brokers think that's being nosy, but really it's not. All we're trying to do is figure out how this property is performing and why it's performing the way it is. If it's performing well, then your version of the cap rate may be correct. And I've also seen in expenses where a lender will charge a reserve. A reserve is for maintenance and repairs, and if you fall short on being able to have the necessary income to make the payment. And so sometimes a reserve can be very high. I've seen a reserve up to $50,000. And reserves are really the owner's money. And it's not an expense and does not belong in the expenses, because what we're trying to do is see what the property is performing at. If the property is not performing well, we probably won't buy it or we'll offer less. So when you got $50,000 in expenses that shouldn't be there, what is that going to do? Well, the first thing it's going to do is going to just mess up all your figures, because now your cap rate's going to be off, your price can be off, and you would have to look at it from the fact that, well, if I had $50,000 more in income, what would this property be worth? So you don't want to have reserves in an expense statement, and neither do you want to have amortization or mortgage in the expenses. I've seen a lot of brokers put out an expense statement that has the amortization in it, and they charge the interest off as an expense, and the principal, they try to add that back in as income. Well, that's just not true. In fact, it should go in another place on the form, which is past net operating income. And remember, what we're trying to do is look at the expenses on this property and determine if the expenses are valid and reasonable. And then we can say, okay, well, if I own this property, then my expenses are going to be about the same. Now, if the property is run down, then you're going to revise that expense statement and get it to where you think it ought to be with the amount of money that you're going to have to spend to repair the property. And so, of course, we know your price will go down. But what we want to see is this property operating. How is it operating today? I see people that bring these properties to meetings, and they always bring projected income. That's not bad on new property that has not a history. But if you've got property that's got I don't care if it's a 2-bedroom rental or a 200-unit apartment complex, if that property has a history of rental and income and expenses, then if you're trying to sell it, you're selling an investment, and the person that's trying to buy that investment needs to know how that property is performing. And that's not a hard thing to do. You need to know. And we'll even ask for the income tax records to see what is being declared to the IRS as far as income and expenses. And if the expenses are being padded, like your car insurance or your cell phone bills or your mother's house insurance or anything like that, then we're going to take it out of the expenses and we're going to see how that property will actually perform. And so that's a very good way to look at property. Now, I want to give you a formula on net operating income. And let's see if I can call that up on the screen. And let's see. Right here is a formula. And I'm going to put it up to the broadcast. And I'm going to make it go solo. So, but as you can see, it's just a circle divided into 3 parts. And you have your net operating income on top. You have the rate, and that rate of return is what you want. I mean, if you were saying, well, I need to make 6% on my money, or I need to make 10% on my money, that's where that would go, is in the R. And then if you divide the income by the rate that you're wanting, then that'll give you the value. And the income is the net operating income. So you can see why that needs to really be accurate, because if you got a bogus operating income up there, then of course your value is either going to be way too high or way low. Now just think, if I would have left that $50,000 reserve counted as an expense in the income statement, that'd have been $50,000 less income. And then if I divided that net operating income by the rate I wanted, the price that I would be willing to offer would be much lower. Remember on this chart, the lower the cap rate, the higher the price. The lower the price, the higher the cap rate. And so what you want to do, if you want an 8% return on your money, you would divide 0.08 into the net operating income and come out with a figure. So it's not very hard to see how this formula works, but I use this formula every day because it is such, and it gives me a rule of thumb. And then I will go ask for the income and expenses and do a deeper dive and see if the expenses and the income are actually true. And then we'll know what that we can give on as far as a purchase price. You know, rates of return, I could put it in a bank and earn 2% or 1%. I could buy a CD and make 3 or 4%. Or I could be a hard money lender and I could make up to 10%. And so I could buy stocks and bonds and probably make anywhere from 8 to 15%. So we have to look at the investment and see where I can get the best rate of return. And if you're going to offer me a 4% return and I can get an 8% somewhere else, then I'm going to go somewhere else. So when you're figuring your net operating income, you got to be very, very careful. Just look at this. If you're offering for me to buy your property and I'm only going to make 4%, you know, that's pretty close to even what I have to pay at the bank. If I have to pay the lender 6% and I'm making 4% on my property, that doesn't sound like too good of an investment to me. But if you're offering your property out at an 8 or 10%, then I'm going to look at it, because now you've narrowed my choices down. I can make 8 to 10% on my cash flow, and my depreciation and capital gain, if there is going to ever be any, will be figured on top of that. And so the higher the cap rate, the better the investor likes it. The lower the cap rate, the more you run the risk of losing money. And that goes back to that water heater that's going to cost you $2,500. And you're only clearing $500 a month on your investment. So there goes 4 or 5 months worth of income right there. So net operating income is very, very critical. Now let me show you another one here. Cash flow before taxes. So see, with this very circle, you can change out to what you want. Cash flow before taxes, we're going to figure what our cash on cash return is, and your equity investment and your cash on cash. So see, I've just changed those terms. Cash flow before tax is on the top. And that's my actual cash flow that I would get from this investment. That's very similar to your net operating income. That is the net operating income on a cash sale. And then I'm going to divide that by my equity investment. In other words, if I put down $300,000 and I've got $50,000 in attorney's fees and title cost, then I'm going to divide that cash flow on a yearly basis by my investment, which is $350,000, and that's going to give me my cash on cash. In other words, if I put this much cash in an investment, here's going to be my return. And so, believe it or not, that we do go through these and we measure these rates of return to see exactly how much money in return that we're going to make. And so when you're figuring out your investment and wondering where to start and how to start, I would start with what's called an annual property operating data sheet, APOD. And there you can list all the income and all the expenses, and your bottom line will be your net operating income. And that net operating income is probably the most critical part of all the analysis. From this net operating income, the lender is going to figure their debt coverage ratio. In other words, they're going to say, we'll give you a loan at X amount of money, but we want your cash flow to have a 25% cushion. So they may say that their debt coverage ratio is 1.25. In other words, you're going to get 100% of the income from the property, plus you've got a 25% cushion. And so it's not a complicated process, but it is a process that every investor needs to go through to determine if they're going to make any money or not. I get brokers all the time that put in their MLS system that the cash flow or the income and expenses is not available. Well, that does cause a little bit of problem because all investors want to see what the income is and the expenses so they can determine if this is a good investment or a marginal investment or not worth investing in at all. I mean, all of us can see potential, and we could say, hey, if I fixed up these units, I could get $500 a month or $1,000 a month. Yes, we understand potential, but we want to see the history of how these properties are operating. So if you're coming to most brokers that are knowledgeable and understand cash flow analysis, be prepared and have a good net operating income statement. And that'll go a long way because not only do appraisers use that, lenders use it, other brokers use it, your CPA will use it. So the net operating income is very, very important. So I'm going to drop that down. And so this is Chuck Trice at Trice and Company Real Estate, and I work with people for their investment needs. And I also go to the National Council of Exchanger meeting. That's 4 times a year. And there will be brokers from about all over the United States, and we gather there and have really good education. And we try to match properties and investors to all the good investments that are out there. And that is really a place where you need good net operating income, and your figures have to be very good, or you just won't get any action on your property. And that is part of what we call equity marketing. And it's also creative solutions and ideas. And so if you would like to contact me and talk about your investment, or if you would like to come on to a broadcast like this and discuss your investment and have it go live on Facebook, or have a recording of this, then give me a call. It's kind of a fun way to do this kind of a technology. I like it. It has a lot of good things that go along with it. So this is Chuck Trice, and this is what I call Investment Tuesday. And so thanks for watching.